Welcome to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name's Jared Mello, and I'm the shepherd of black sheep. So when you see the little wizard emoji with the black heart and then the white sheep, that expresses the shepherd of black sheep. Now today, we're going to go over several videos about our buddy Nick Reiner. And in the first one, Maureen lays an epic smackdown. And I couldn't agree more with what Maureen has to say. And so I think there definitely needs to be more of this in the accountability kind of quote unquote tough love realm because it can really help. And then we're going to go to Joe, the average lawyer. And then we're going to go to a Tony Bruschi video. And then we're going to have a grab bag video at the end there. Tim Dillon did a little bit of a clip on no contact with family members. And we'll see how that goes. Aldersgate witness, welcome. Oh, you keep on changing your name, Mac. Tough to keep up. You're just like Phil Bradley. Actually, many of the black sheep often change their names. It's hard to keep up with. But as long as you report in, it's all good to me. So let's see what Brian Etten and Maureen have to say for themselves. And we'll wait for more people to flow into the chat here too. Billy Box, what's shaking? Out with the illegals, he says. Don't forget, I change it based on my musical projects. Nothing wrong with that. People choose their clothes based on their moods. So there's nothing wrong with changing your username based on your musical projects, I would say. And what did people think of the most recent Mike King interview and the Dr. Salerno interview? Song Bits, welcome, miss. How are you? How were your birthday festivities a few days ago? All right. So in this, though, what you're going to realize is, Ellie, how are you? Basically, you're going to just hear more about how Nick Reiner is super entitled. And he just has such a resentment towards his parents that I just think is unfounded. And this was going on for a long time. This is not something that just kind of popped up out of nowhere. This goes back to his roommate when the roommate was 15 at that rehab. And Brian Etten goes into more detail about what that roommate had to say. Nothing wrong with that, Song Bits. I'm worried about immigration in the Western world. I can't deny it. Well, if they really wanted to work on immigration, you know what they would do? They would crack down on the employers hiring them. Why don't they do that? They don't do that because the economy would crumble, and neither Republicans nor Democrats want them to do that because the economy would not do well. Left you a comment about Mike King interview. Very good. Very good, Ellie. Hello there, Jimmy. We'll pop on here.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out my show. I really, really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. I really appreciate all the support. If you'd rather listen, you can also check me out on all the podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple. There are still so many questions about Nick Reiner, what may have set him off in that moment, what built him up to allegedly kill his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, and some big developments now. We are now hearing from a man who says that he was in rehab with Nick Reiner. Danny Svilar says he shared a room with Nick Reiner at a luxury rehab in Malibu, California, when they were both 15 years old. This is according to the Daily Mail, who spoke with Svilar. And my producer also spoke to him. He didn't want to do another interview right now, but he confirmed his story. He said to the Daily Mail, as soon as I saw that Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, were murdered, I knew exactly who it was. Danny says he was in rehab because of a shopping.
And yes, to finish the point about that, that's like Republicans and Democrats, they both know that. The economy would crumble, but if you really wanted to work on it, that's what you do. You take away the incentive. The fact that they don't do that, like they're really scrounging to find people to deport. And honestly, there's more people to deport in Texas than there are in Minnesota. but why do they go to Minnesota and not Texas? And like they're having to scrounge. They're asking people for their IDs, and because most of them are not criminals as they would like you to believe. That's what they want you to believe. So you just feel less sympathy for what is going on, but that's just not accurate.
Addiction, and that he was friends with Nick while they shared a room together. He says he met the Reiners while he was in rehab, and that the rehab cost $60,000 a month, which I'm going to talk to a little bit more with my guest in a couple of minutes. He's very complimentary of the Reiners, saying that they did everything for Nick, and they spent literally millions of dollars on his recovery. But what's disturbing is Danny says Nick would go off about his parents throughout the night. You know, they were roommates, and apparently he would like stay up in the night talking about his parents, saying, quote, how much he effing hated his parents. Danny says he just really oppressed anger towards the fame. And, quote, I don't know how it is having a father with that level of fame, but regardless of that, Nick had no sense of gratitude, no sense of appreciation. He was just an effing pompous little punk. He wanted to be out smoking pot, doing pills, doing whatever, and his family just wanted to get him help. That is the quote from Danny. Danny says initially,
it depends on their status, Elder. Like technically it is, but they're trying to make you think they're all pedos and grapists, and that's just not true. It's just not true.
Nick was welcoming and funny, but that there was a side of him that could just flip. And he says that he saw Nick attack another teen at the facility, and at one point he even had rage towards him, which is why they didn't remain roommates. Again, that's according to his interview with the Daily Mail. Danny told a story how he said Nick looked like John Travolta's son, and he says that quote really set him off. Apparently, he really didn't like that. He says that Nick tried to get aggressive with him and that it got physical, and that a tech actually had to step in at the rehab. And he explained that Nick got in his face and even raised a fist. Danny says he doesn't want to identify the rehab facility, but it was apparently very fancy. Again, $60,000 a month, had daily yoga, massages, private chefs. And he says that Nick told him things that, quote, threw him the wrong way. And this part is really interesting. Danny says that he was upset by Nick's attitude because he didn't seem to appreciate how much his parents cared for him. And he only had really nice things to say about Rob and Michelle. He says that Rob and Michelle genuinely cared for Nick, would do anything for him to get better. He said the parents of these children with money, they usually are not truly involved in wanting to help them help their kids or do that. Many of them just hire like a helping hand, basically a handler, if you will. Lots of kids in there had absent parents who relied on nannies, but Rob and Michelle were there for every single family group, Danny says. They were there for every therapy session. They didn't have to give me the time of day. He says, I played Frisbee with Rob. They just wanted to get him well. Danny said, I would hate to see him try to plead this guilty or not guilty by insanity, when in reality, he told me how much he effing hated his parents.
And again, to me, all of this evidence completely destroys his NGI case. This looks like premeditation. It looks like bitterness and resentment building up over the years, envy, and just overall hatred. Is that you're going to get an NGI from that? I don't think so. I don't think he's going to get it.
Especially his father. And remember, this is from back when they were 15 years old. Danny says he truly had no cause to hate them except for the fact that they are the reason for a lot of his problems, and that boiled down to fame. That is what Nick apparently said. Danny said they just wanted him to do well, and he did not want to be well. And the hatred is just one thing that really got to me. All of us in there, we all had our gripes with our parents, but at the end of the day, we were grateful for what we had. Him, on the other hand, not so much. I'm joined now by Maureen O'Connell, a retired FBI agent, also host of the podcast.
Maureen goes off on this, and it's pretty classic if you ask me.
Best case, worst case. It's always nice to see you, Maureen. And we've been talking about the Nick Reiner story ever since it happened. More details are coming out now. with this roommate of Nick's speaking out, a roommate of his from this fancy rehab place in Malibu back when they were both 15 years old. And what struck me, I think, the most is this quote from the roommate where he says, "As soon as I saw that Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were murdered, I knew exactly who it was." And that even all these years later, when he saw the news, Nick Reiner popped into his head right away.
And again, if all these years later, that's the first thing the guy speaks of, does that sound like not guilty by reason of insanity to you? Or does that sound more like, no, he knew absolutely what he was doing, and he's been talking about hitting them for years? To me, it's clear. But what do you think, Chad?
He wasn't the only one that said that. Some of the other people close to the investigation, or really close to the family, they said the same thing, and they didn't want to disparage the family because they knew how important they didn't want to say anything that would harm the image of Rob or Michelle, which this doesn't. I mean, by all accounts, from everyone who knew them, they were wonderful parents who cared deeply about all their children and did whatever they could to help them. So, but behind the scenes, almost everyone said the same thing, which tells you how dangerous he must have been. Because
and how far back it all goes, these warning signs.
Yeah. Because, I mean, all kinds of things can happen in life, but when someone gets murdered, for the first thing to say is, I think it was this person in the family, unless it's the actual spouse, that's very rare. Like we talked about, killing one's parents is not something that happens every day. But he seemed to have a very deep hatred going all the way back, according to this former roommate and many others.
Yeah, this roommate, Danny, again, I found this part to be really disturbing. He says that they would stay in the room together at night and be up in the night just talking after lights out, and that Nick would go off about his parents throughout the night, saying things like how much he effing hated his parents, even back when he was 15 years old.
Yeah, he probably wondered, why aren't I respected the way they are? Well, it's because they put in the work.
Why aren't I respected the way they are? What does that sound like? That sounds like an entitled attitude. It sounds like someone who wants the attention and admiration of someone who's done all of these great things, but doesn't think they need to do the work to do it. So that's more of the vulnerable narcissism version of grandiosity there. They think they should just get it for existing. That's the entitlement. That's the covert version of grandiosity, but how it comes out, completely obnoxious.
They worked really hard their whole lives, and unfortunately that work ethic was not instilled in Nick. And, I mean, he probably didn't have any responsibilities much growing up, like a lot of us did from a very early age. And, I mean, who knows? Maybe Nick Reiner would have been very different had he grown up on a farm and he had really heavy responsibilities from the age of 6. Who knows?
Well, will investigators go back and talk to people like this? I mean, is this
Absolutely
important for the prosecution?
Yes. And this roommate is now working with the prosecution, so they're probably not going to be making or taking any more interviews. And the first thing I saw when I saw how many rehab facilities he went to, I knew that the people that work there couldn't talk about it because of HIPAA, but I knew the other people that lived there probably could or would at some point, but it took a while for this to happen and for this to break loose. But if they know, and they'll be able to find out from the financials where exactly he stayed at what time and whatever, they have to go back. That's a long, deep investigation, but it's an investigation that can definitely be done. I've done it before with my company, looking for people from past issues on different situations. And we do everything from going back to their high school yearbooks and finding things out, or there's just a myriad of different ways that you can try to find out who in fact was at the same facility at the same time. It's a very in-depth investigation, but it's one definitely worth having, because we're going to hear a lot more about stuff like this at the trial, which is what I talked about at the very beginning.
If you were working this case, though, is it important to even talk to someone from over 15 years ago? I mean, does that help
Yes.
prosecutors in a way that I guess that he's had this hatred allegedly for so long?
Yes, because if right now the defense is saying, "Oh, this only happened because his meds got all mixed up, the poor little kid," no, that isn't exactly.
And this is Maureen. She's not buying it. She's not buying the meds got mixed up. She's not buying even schizoaffective. She's like, no, this is narcissistic, spoiled brat, entitled, and a lack of empathy. That's what this is.
What happened. What happened is, if you listen to the rest of this guy's testimony, all he cared about was scoring dope, and not just because he wanted to escape his own life. He wanted to be as revered as his parents. He actually thought, to a certain extent, in my opinion, that he would be revered. So it's important for the prosecution to very clearly say that this person had a hatred long before he was doing hard drugs, because you're talking about a time where all he did was marijuana. That's the only drug that he was doing at that time. And he already had a deep-seated hatred that he really couldn't articulate why, because he was 15. He didn't have the cognitive ability to do.
More personality disorder stuff, if you ask me. This stuff starts, I mean, arguably, it's there from the start. But when you have these kinds of issues for as long as you can remember, and you can't articulate why you hate your parents, it just speaks to someone who is character disturbed and has a personality disorder.
So, but he had a hatred nonetheless.
Hey guys, if you watch my videos, you know how much I work. I just don't have a ton of time for cooking. Allegedly for this rehab that Nick was at with this roommate, which I mean, it's just so much money. Do you think do those rehabs?
And of course, narcissistic people love to play the victim in what I would consider the Eeyore routine.
Ever call police when people get violent, or do they make police reports, or because the families are paying so much, does everything just sort of stay hush hush?
I can't speak for all of them, but I would say that as a general rule, it's kind of, I would say no, unless it got really, really bad and someone was badly hurt. Because if you look at all the old mental health institutions, they had all those orderlies that were just like, really strong guys that would try to just restrain someone until they calmed down or they could medicate them and things along those lines. So I think that's probably more what would happen, because it is considered, I'm sure it falls under a medical facility because HIPAA applies, and depending on what level of certification they have, I would imagine that would be handled internally.
It made me, when I was reading about it, though, it made me think back to what you said early on about private security in LA, the way that some of these rich and famous people will handle things behind the scenes without the police getting involved.
Yeah, they try to avoid it because, it's two sides of the same coin. I had a dear friend call me about a neighbor that's driving everyone in their complex crazy and everything. And I said, the important thing to do is to get a document trail on this person, so that if in fact the police are called again, they'll know that they've been called there 8 times before, etc. Well, the opposite is also true. If your child is getting in trouble and everything, the last thing you want is that paper trail following them for the rest of their life. So you do whatever you can to avoid that. And if you can hire people, if you have enough money to hire people to keep them out of public scrutiny, it's probably a good idea to do so.
Do these rehabs and private security, if these celebrities, or if the Reiners had private security trying to handle things, not to get the police involved, do they have an ethical obligation at some point to get the police involved if they see things getting more and more violent?
Yes, if people are getting hurt, yes. And there's no doubt in my mind that people have been accosted by Nick Reiner over and over from a very young age. Just look at the incident in that article from that former roommate, where he just threw a fit and then threw a rock through a stained glass window in a chapel. I mean, in a perfect world, he would have gotten tackled and punched by someone else there. What is that? when your child is doing that over and over, there have got to be consequences, and the consequences have to fit the crime. And it seems to me that his consequences were about 14% of what they should have been throughout his life.
And I would agree with that. And that's where Rob Reiner was saying, oh no, we should be listening to our son instead of these licensed professionals that are telling us he's a liar, a manipulator, and a deceiver. That was a blunder to me by Rob Reiner. I think that was him letting his son manipulate him for whatever reason, consequences. And some people will say, Jared, tough love and consequences is not what you need. It's like, nah, in this case, that is what is needed. And I think this is where Dr. George Simon would say it's about character. Character can be a choice regardless of what kind of mental condition you have. Even the personality disordered people, they're still choosing. If they were to actually have character, they would try to do something different. And a lot of them, they are shameless, and their lack of empathy contributes to that, right? But they can try to do better, but many of them just don't. So I think consequences were needed for Nick.
I do like the fact that Rob and his wife sent him to a couple of those, like that one in Utah and stuff. My understanding is that that's a very rough and tumble, hard, difficult thing where you have to dig deep and to find solutions for things. So I like that concept.
Yeah, it sounds like they were just doing everything and anything they possibly could. One thing that the roommate Danny also said is that Nick really had issues and anger towards the fame, towards his parents' fame, almost like a resentment, it seems like.
Yeah. It's like anything else. When someone has something you don't have, let's just use money because it's easy. You're resentful of them because they have money. Like I always say to people in this country that go on and on about the wealthy are doing this, the wealthy are doing that. And in large part, I think when I hear someone makes it big, my first thought is good for you. I'm really happy that people are making it big. I'm happy that people are successful. If you're successful, I'm happy, you know? So he's not that type of person. He didn't live in a space of gratitude, and he just was wondering, why are they getting all this and I'm not getting any of it? His mindset was always geared toward himself. He is a very selfish person for whatever reason.
And the roommate seemed to pick up on that and said that he was upset by Nick's attitude because he didn't seem to appreciate how much his parents cared for him. And he said that Rob and Michelle genuinely cared for Nick, would do anything for him to get better. And the roommate actually said, you know, that was different than some of the other parents that sent their kids to this rehab who had like handlers handling everything. No, it was Rob and Michelle actually handling everything.
And showing up and being there for meetings and parents' weekends. And dropping everything to be there for him.
And it sounds like to me, Rob and his wife, Michelle, they were putting in the footwork to try. They just didn't quite understand mental health, addiction, and personality disorders enough, which is kind of surprising considering how many people have personality disorders in Hollywood and addiction issues and mental health issues. I don't know. Must have, like, anyone can have a blind spot, and that might have been one of their blind spots.
I wonder, it makes me sad to think about for them I wonder if he ever had moments where he was appreciative or if he was just always like this.
Well, he was a master manipulator, so he absolutely did because he felt he could just, hook them back in, throw it out and just reel them back in. And he did it over and over and over. And he knew he could play him like a cheap fiddle. And that's just another asshole thing to do. Pardon my language.
Well, and he said that the roommate said that that Nick felt a lot of his problems boiled down to the fame. But
no,
I guess
his problems boiled down to his bad attitude, his lack of gratitude, and his narcissistic just mantrums. No one wants
bad attitude, lack of gratitude, and narcissistic tantrums. Bing, bang, boom. Amen to Mo. Amen to Maureen.
No one wants to see a huge man throwing tantrums. And he never understood that.
I wonder if they had let him get into more trouble, if things would have ended up differently.
Yeah, like scared straight. Remember how parents, I had a parent say to me the other day, I was holding their toddler yesterday, and they were saying, "Well, if anything happens, we're gonna bring them down for a scared straight." I said, "We don't have to do that, guys. Just I've always been a big believer on having strict and hard parameters with children from a very early age, because if you can do it from the age of 0 or whatever to 7 years old, the rest of it is gonna be a lot easier. So many people think, "Oh, they're just a child until they're 9." Well, now it's out of control. That barn is left, or that horse has left the barn and it ain't coming back. You're gonna have a real rough time with that one.
Yeah, for as much as they were trying to help him, maybe in some ways, if they had let him fall harder, it would have made a difference.
A lot harder.
Yeah.
Much, much harder.
The roommate also said that he doesn't seem to be happy with the possibility of an insanity defense based on everything like that goes back as far as when he knew Nick and how long he's had this hatred for his parents. You keep mentioning how manipulative you think Nick is.
Yes.
Do you think he could manipulate these I mean, he's obviously going to have psychiatric reviews and stuff. I mean, could he manipulate them into thinking he's insane if he's actually not?
No, I don't think so. I think he's gonna try, but I don't think he really can, because
He'll try, and his defense team might try, but I don't think he's going to be able to succeed.
well, it depends on how much. I should rephrase that. It depends on how much time they allow Nick to spend with these, these doctors, because this is their world. This is the arena they live in, and this is what they do for a living. And they tend to ask the same question or present the same problem 14 different times in 14 different ways, or 20 different times in 20.
And this is something Dr. Drew mentioned too. Consequences. So maybe Nick Reiner goes to jail for drug possession or theft or something for 6 months to a year. That could be something that turns someone around. Because you need a monumental thing to really shift someone's attitude when it's so bad like that. And again, that's what a 12-step program is supposed to be for. That's what smart recovery is supposed to be for. I think even 12 steps, though, they alter your mindset even more than smart recovery would. But that's what's needed when your issues are that severe. You need a drastic solution, and you need something that's going to completely overhaul your whole personality and character. And guess what? When people are struggling with addiction, even sometimes personality disorders, they've also shown that 12-step programs can really help people in those positions. So to me, that's what he needed, but he wasn't willing to do it. He didn't do it. He felt like he was above those things, but he clearly wasn't.
Different ways depending how much time they spend with them, and they'll be able to find chinks in the armor, so to speak. I just think there's going to be, on the other side of that, or in addition to that, there's going to be so many people coming forward in the trial with instances of him being so incredibly manipulative. When people are called and they're put on the stand, they're going to have to answer questions for both sides, and there's going to be some pointed questions about this topic, and it's going to be very interesting too. But I'm not going to be surprised. There's going to be a lot of testimony about stuff that they've done, and there's going to be a lot of people on there that were just friends of Rob and Michelle's for decades, who saw this as cogent thinking adults at a table watching things happen. And when a kid acts out like this, even from an early age, you can imagine the rides home of the people that are attending these parties or these events or these holidays, and it's like, wow, do you think he's ever going to grow out of this? Or no, I really don't, and this is why. I mean, so these adults, I think, are going to be a wealth of information for the prosecution, but they're all also going to get called for the defense for, I don't know. It's going to be.
But Diesel, there are people in those programs that do, because there's a spectrum of narcissism. There's a spectrum of cluster B disorders. Just because you're narcissistic doesn't mean you're like always extreme. There can be less severe versions. That's what they think now. And I guarantee you there's people in there that admit they're alcoholics and admit they're addicts that would probably qualify for cluster B. But the thing is, over time, they might not qualify for it anymore. If they're going by the symptoms, I would say, right? If you have a narcissistic operating system, you'll always have it, but you might not behave like it. And again, this is why they'll say in these 12-step programs, you're always an addict, because it's similar, right? If you always have a narcissistic operating system, you need to be hyper vigilant. You got to be vigilant and staying on top of it. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why it helps. And again, it's not easy for them, but it's also necessary if they're going to improve.
It's going to be a fascinating trial, I think. I really hope that the trial is televised so that we can hear all the testimony, because it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and I always hope the trials are televised for obvious reasons. I'm just thinking about you and your business now, Maureen, like your private security business. We're in LA, where you work with rich people and powerful people and some famous people with the different things that you do. And I just keep thinking about the Reiners and how they just kept trying to get Nick help and weren't giving up like most, like good parents wouldn't. But when you work with these famous people, I mean, are they ever just not living in reality? Like, I don't know. I'm just wondering,
it's some of them don't have a real clear picture of what reality looks like. They try, they're good people. They're, the way I look at the world is we're all just muddling through to the best of our ability in large part. And that's what they're doing too. They think things should be going one way, and then they find out everything is down the toilet, and how do we fix it?
I think we've gone over that term before, Tina, the wound collector. I think that was in regards to the Michael McKee case, is I think what that was about. Now, what were they saying about it? I think what they were saying is he was holding on to this bitterness and resentment, his loss of control of Monique. So they called him a wound collector, I think is what it was. I'm not sure. Did they use that to Nick Reiner too? I can't remember the context in which it was used.
So you just do what you can, and you bring a common sense approach, and you just talk to them about what you think should happen. It's all up to them what they decide to do, but they just want to hear different opinions from different people. And it sounds like Rob did that also. He said we should have just listened to our child instead of these experts. But I've always been a person where if my car is broken, I'm not theorizing on what's happening. I'm going to go to an expert and I'm going to listen to what they say.
But if these experts in rehabs are trying to make money, do you think they were just kept telling them, oh, try this new program that's $60,000 a month, rather than someone just saying, kind of like what you said, you got to let him hit rock bottom. Why is he still living in your guest house? Why are you doing every little thing for him? Just kick him out.
I haven't had experience with any rehab facility per se saying, oh, send your kids here. But there is a little echo chamber in the world where they.
So we'll put this on the screen song bits because it applies to both Nick Reiner and Michael McKee. A wound collector is an individual who habitually gathers, nurtures, and dwells on personal slights, injustices, and grievances, often refusing to forgive or forget past wrongs. And yeah, I mean, that's basically what I had said with it. But it's someone who kind of gets a perverse sense of supply even from being that victim, from collecting their grievances and then using them as a source of fuel to kind of make themselves angry. And in the most extreme cases, you wind up with a Nick Reiner or Michael McKee.
They talk to each other about what worked and what didn't. And even if it only works for 4 months, people are often happy about that. The people I work with are more likely to be saying, don't send them there, because these are the kind of things that we're seeing happen with our other clients. So that's not something I've had experience with, especially in this part of town. That the ones I hear about in Utah and in these rustic and rough and tumble environments, I seem to hear more and more good things about them. This $60,000 a month, I mean, that
And so here's the thing with Nick Reiner. He can perceive all sorts of things as a wound. Doesn't mean it's an accurate assessment. But here's the other thing. If you're mentally ill, that can suck. I mean, that part can suck too. Or maybe he's undiagnosed on the spectrum. Yeah, no one chooses that. But again, what is your attitude towards it? What are you going to do about it? That's the thing that matters. But there was all sorts of things he probably perceived as a wound or a slight that might not have been.
me is complete and utter insanity, especially if it's $60,000 a month. Why are they sharing rooms? I'm sure there's a reason for it, but I don't know what it is.
Well, they apparently had yoga, massages, private chefs. When I interviewed Dr. Drew about this, the first thing he said is like any rehab charging $60,000 a month, he would be skeptical of. I forget the number he gave, but he said like anything more than like 10 a month, or I think it was 10 or 13,000 a month. He's like, it just doesn't make sense.
I agree. I would agree with that.
There's also this Washington Post profile that came out about Nick, where they talk about this incident at Thanksgiving dinner where someone who was at the dinner who wanted to remain nameless said that Nick.
And this is a new story. We haven't heard this one before, but this is a story at Thanksgiving dinner, mind you.
Said, I'm certainly not grateful for this effing food, and I'm not grateful for any of you freeloaders in my house. I just can't wait to get through
My
this
house.
effing.
Do you like that? You like that?
Yeah.
That's a sense of entitlement. Have you ever heard more entitlement in your life? A big loaf who's never done a goddamn thing in his life other than disrupt everyone else's life?
I love the tough love from Maureen. In the mental health world, people are so scared of it. But I think now, like sometimes it's needed. Like Maureen's dead on.
Is saying, you're a freeloader in my house. Dude, look in the mirror. You're the freeloader of all freeloaders.
Wonder if anyone ever told him that. That's, you know? Do you think he was
That's
just
why
treated
I'm
with
not
such
personal
kid
friends
gloves?
with a lot of these people, Brian, because I would be the one to tell him, and I wouldn't care a bit.
Yeah. Well, he said, I just can't wait to get through this effing dinner so I can get back to my room. And then according to the dinner guest, he threw the turkey leg at his father's plate.
And that's just obnoxious, rude, and ignorant. And I'd be pissed if I were his dad. I'd be like, dude, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But what is it with Cluster B folks? They really struggle to show gratitude. It is not really in their vernacular. They don't feel that feeling either. I think it's related to their lack of empathy. So the part of you that feels empathy is also the part of you that can feel gratitude. And so I think, and that's something you don't hear about as much, right, though? But if you're lacking empathy, that contributes to many things. Your inability to feel gratitude, your inability to love, all sorts of things.
But Brian, you're forgetting something very important.
Yes.
The whole purpose of this exercise was his father held the drumstick first, and as they passed the meat platter around, everyone talked about what they were grateful for. And so everyone's saying, wonderful things, and it gets to him. He just can't have that. People are in a state of gratitude. They're being thankful to his father, the host. They're happy being together. Nick couldn't have any of that. He had to smash that into pieces, right? Otherwise, it just wouldn't be a holiday for him.
Jeez. And think about, we're hearing this story from.
And again, just zoom out on this story. If you're hearing this story about a wealthy family and their adult kids, like what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Spoiled, entitled, ungrateful brat. That's what you think. And honestly, your first reaction would be correct. That's what it is. Now, some people, when they look into it, oh no, mental illness. Oh no, this. Oh no, that. Oh no, this. It's like, nah. Focus on the character stuff first. Other things can fall into place from there. And yeah, I'm not saying they shouldn't be taking medicines for mental health, but you also need to be working on that character part. If you don't, everything else you do is just not going to be as successful as it could.
the Thanksgiving dinner. We're hearing from the roommate. And these are just two, stories, but there's got to be so many more from people who are really close to the writers who aren't going to speak out right now, probably have even worse stories.
Oh, definitely. I'd be
Yeah.
shocked if we're not going to hear just utter craziness during this trial or leading up to it. So far, this just came out now, and it's been what, 2 months? So we don't know what's coming down the pike and from what direction.
And even if they can bring evidence of mental illness, I mean, he still had to get the knife. There was still, they say, premeditation. We've still got all of these former friends coming forward saying that he hated his parents so much for so long. Does it even matter, the mental illness, when you have all those other things that come in?
The most important elements of whether or not someone committed a crime is the premeditation, like you mentioned, the gathering of tools or whatever. Let's find out where that knife came from, how much planning went into it, and how much planning went into the escape. Why would he have to escape from a crime scene that he didn't know he committed, or he didn't have the mental capacity to understand?
Not knowing the nature and quality, and not knowing right from wrong. Those are the qualifiers for an NGI, and it only has to be one or the other. But that being said, I don't think he qualifies for either.
He knew right away what he did, and he got the hell out of there, and he walked. He walked several miles to that hotel, checked in, tried to clean up. I don't know what he did there, but the evidence log from that hotel, the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, and what they retrieved from that location is going to be very interesting for me to see. Then he gets on the metro in the middle of the night to head down toward USC to score a bunch of more dope, where he goes all the time to score his dope. And he's like, why? Because he had to get it out of his head. He had to try. It's not only physical distance, but it's emotional and mental distance from what he just did to his parents. And he's probably thinking still in some way, shape, or form, he was going to be okay. And one final thing I'd like to say about him is the one thing that's really pissing me off about this whole thing, not one, there's 8 million, but even though I totally understand his brother and sister for not paying for this, his defense, why in the hell do we have to pay for it? I mean, as a citizen of Los Angeles, I understand everyone has a basic right to a defense. But when someone has this much money, why should we have to pay for it?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, it's the way our system is set up, but the point you make about him, his family having a lot of money, and I don't know if eventually he's going to get some money in some way when everything shakes out. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Well, thank you, Maureen, as always.
You're welcome.
As always, I really appreciate Maureen for taking the time to speak with me. I went back, you heard me mention with Maureen about what Dr. Drew had said about these really expensive rehabs. I went back and found that clip. I was off a little bit by the dollar number that he said, but I wanted to replay that for you just because I thought it was so interesting what he said.
Generally, I mean, he's complicated, right? He's got co-occurring disorder. He's got some sort of psychiatric condition and addiction, and he's been a chronic relapser, and he's tried multiple treatments. So people will sometimes go to these sort of tertiary, quaternary referral centers to try to help. And I understand why they would, but the reality is when it comes to addiction treatment done well should not cost much money. It just shouldn't. It is, if you're getting charged tons of money for addiction treatment, go somewhere else. Some of the best.
And again, it's just not necessary. You don't need $60,000 a month for good addiction treatment, because what are they even doing there? Like, there's not $60,000 worth of services. You really only need what, 5 to 10,000 max, because you have professionals there and the food and whatever. But 60,000, I mean, that's just to kind of separate you from the other income levels. Honestly, what else is it for?
Programs. We have very few good programs in Southern California, but the best ones, very inexpensive. You have to have a dedicated team of people who are just dedicated to treating this condition, who know it well. And those people, it's their calling. And so they're not there to charge a bunch of money. And often these places that do well for low income, for low cost, are supported by the community. So they're sort of an endowment as well. So if you're paying, really, in my opinion, if you're paying above like $6,000 or $7,000 a month, take a good look at that. You maybe ought to go somewhere else.
So are they just taking advantage of people?
They're not taking advantage. It's that the services. Let's look at it this way. Now, Nick is a little bit of a different case because he's been through so many treatments and whatnot. And I can imagine, as parents, you want to go, I'm going to send him to the best place. I'm going to send him where the doctors are expensive, the workups are expensive, the care is expensive, the environment is expensive, the staff is deep, and there's lots of people there employed. So it's not they're ripping people off. It's just, does it make a difference in the outcome? And generally speaking, it does not. If you're spending a lot of money, the outcome is not necessarily better.
All right, so I'll continue to stay on top of this story with any developments. Again, I really appreciate you guys for supporting my channel, for subscribing, for commenting. And again, if you'd rather listen rather than watch these videos, they're also available now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. All right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Joe Palmetto. Joe, the lawyer, thank you very much for tuning in. Please, I've been having issues with the sound. YouTube is telling me that the sound is working. So if you hop in, please confirm for me that the sound is working. Today, we're going to take a look at Nick Reiner's life. I'm going to read an article and give you an opinion. The Washington Post did an in-depth article inside Nick Reiner's life of privilege, pills, and pain. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I'm really trying to increase the viewership on the show. I'm trying to grow the channel. So if you give me a like, you leave me a comment, those are great ways to help me. It's totally free. Just drop me a comment, a like, share this video. Really like to grow this. Last video I did on Nick Reiner, I got a lot of views, 21,000. Then I did a video on Busfield and I got 41. So the content really matters. For those of you in the chat, please let me know that you can hear me. And before we dig into this article, everybody raise a cup, your glass in the air, drink with me. It tastes better when we drink together, trying to avoid caffeine tonight, but I guess I'm drinking sugar instead. And for those of you who are new to this channel, I'm a practicing Pittsburgh criminal defense lawyer going on 12 years.
Often smudgy. The difference is just people's willingness to actively participate in their recovery and do the next right thing. Often it comes down to that. There are always the possibility of other variables, mental health, whatever, but often it comes into who's willing to do the work.
So a lot of other law tubers, YouTubers, they're great, but I'm one of the few that actually practices criminal defense day in and day out. Hey, Scott Allen, let me know that you can hear me and that the sound is working. I went live a little bit ago and the sound wasn't working, but I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I practice criminal defense day in and day out every single day. You can Google me, you'll see. I'm really trying to grow this channel, give you an opinion on on national news stories, national trials coming from a real defense lawyer. I start a very serious trial in a couple of weeks. I've done it all. I work on drug cases, DUIs, homicides, everything. So we're going to jump into this article inside Nick Reiner's life of privilege and pain. And it starts off with something that is a bit of a funny anecdote. And Scott, thank you very much for letting me know. Rob Reiner lifted a turkey leg and asked those gathered around the Thanksgiving table to partake in a holiday tradition. The guests would pass the meat to one another, each taking a turn, sharing what they are grateful for. How nice. Nick Reiner, Rob's son, was seated next to his father. It was 2018, and Nick was living in the guest house and his parents 13.
That's a question I had about that story. When was it? So the Thanksgiving story is 2018, which makes it 8 years ago, which means Nick Reiner was 24 and living in the guest house. So he was still acting like an obnoxious, entitled pissant at 24.
$18.5 million compound, excuse me, in Brentwood, where the garden was filled with roses planted by the home's original owner, Henry Fonda, who's considered, one of Hollywood's greatest stars. Unemployed at 25, Nick had spent a decade bouncing between this gated enclave and at least 18 rehab facilities paid for by his parents, Rob and Michelle Singer Reiner. And that's the first red flag right there, paid for by his parents. He has told stories on an addiction podcast about going to downtown Los Angeles' Skid Row to procure heroin and shooting crack cocaine in a McDonald's restroom in Maine. But after each bout of degeneracy or failed treatment, he always seemed to end up back here with his parents. And that is called enabling, which is something that parents generally should try to avoid when they are dealing with an addict as their son or daughter. For much as he resisted their interventions, Nick had become accustomed to the trappings of his privileged upbringing. Well, of course, he was raised, in a $13 million house. Unlike at rehab, he had a staff.
And again, this is where Clint Eastwood's method went way better. He made his kids work. He didn't give them $10,000 a month for nothing. Even if they were doing well, he made them get real jobs. So they had to work as valets, and one became a bartender in school. And so they actually had to work. I think that helps you develop your character when you're not just handed every little thing. When you're handed every little thing, it contributes to you being entitled and acting like a brat.
To tidy up.
And also, some of the worst people I know were given everything as a kid. Everything they wanted, they got. And they turned into absolute terrors
for him at home. He was so attached to his private quarters that he once demanded the family's housekeeper retrieve him from a friend's house across town so he could use his own bathroom, a childhood friend recalled. And now I can relate to anybody that doesn't want to use a public bathroom, but a friend's bathroom at a friend's house to go all the way home, I'm assuming to do your number two. That's a heck of a life. Tensions were high that Thanksgiving, according to a guest who attended the meal with roughly 20 others. The person saw signs that Nick might be using air freshener to cover smells in the billiard room, screaming, yelling, cursing, throwing tantrums so violent, one longtime household employee threatened to quit.
And for those who want to know, this guy's name is Joe the Lawyer. And I like this guy. We've covered him once before, and I think he's good.
As the turkey leg made its way around the personalized place settings and professional flower arrangements, guests and family waxed rhapsodic. That's an interesting choice of word. Wax poetic. We're going to go.
Yeah, wax poetic is what you would think.
With rhapsodic, okay? About the bountiful blessings in their lives. Then it was Nick's turn. Well, I'm certainly not grateful for this bleeping food, and I'm not grateful for any of you freeloaders in my house. I just can't wait to get through this bleeping dinner so I can get back to my room. Nick yelled, according to the dinner guest. Then he threw the turkey leg at his father's plate. Rob smiled, the guest said, and picked up the leg. Well, that's really easy to follow. Thanks, Nick. Which, Rob Reiner, very talented guy, I'm assuming, very charismatic. That's a funny comment to make, but it really just glazes over the deep underlying pain and tragedy that seemed to follow his son around. Like most whom the Washington Post spoke to for this story, the people who described Nick's behavior on the condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of the situation after his parents were fatally stabbed in their home in December, facing murder charges that could carry the death penalty. Nick, now 32, and his attorneys have repeatedly postponed his plea hearing amid reports of mental illness and questions about where his siblings, Jake, 34, and Romy, 28, stand in regard to his defense. And they're going to play a really big role in the prosecution. The prosecutors are going to counsel with them because they are the closest surviving relatives of the deceased. A Reiner family spokesperson declined to comment. A spokesperson for the LA County Public Defender's Office, who's representing Nick, declined to answer questions for this story. His previous attorney, Alan Jackson, had said emphatically Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder. And we talked about that press conference. Interviews with 14 individuals who knew Reiner, as well as interviews he gave to an addiction podcast between 2016 and 2018, paint a portrait of a complicated young man struggling to find his footing in the world. The son of one of the most celebrated filmmakers in Hollywood, Reiner viewed himself as a black sheep in his family and was often consumed by feelings of inadequacy. With occasional bursts
Giving us black sheep a bad name there, Nick Reiner. I can't have that.
of temper or violence that usually coincided with drug use. Very sad, very sad. His parents committed endless resources toward his recovery, sending him to treatment centers where most of his peers told the Post he was goofy and well-liked. But after each rehab stint, he would return to treating his addictions casually, even when they led him to despondence and destitution. Well, that's because
So he's treating his addictions casually. What does that mean? It means he's not taking it seriously. It means he's not putting in the footwork. It means he's not willing to do what it takes to do better. I mean, those are the signs of someone who is not going to improve.
he had a permanent parachute to catch him every time he fell. And that was incredibly rich and powerful parents. And it's really tough and sad to say, but the story of Nick's life appears to be one of dependency and the parents enabling Nick to continue his lifestyle as a drug addict. And, at a certain point, I think parents, you need to cut the child off financially, but also if they continue to use drugs, you likely shouldn't allow them to live at your house. And it's generally not something you do because you think it's going to get them to stop, but it is going to stop them from including the parents or other family members in the drug addicted lifestyle, which can bring with it, all kinds of dangers from the police, from other addicts, from other dealers. It's an underworld that generally doesn't lead to good results. And in this situation, it certainly did it. So, hello, Karen Lobel, the enabling here was just on another level. I mean, I think that's ultimately what we're looking at here is maybe one of the greatest cases of enabling in history because the parents had unlimited money.
I just don't think they understood. I don't think they understood addiction, mental health, and personality disorders. There's really not much of an excuse for them not to understand, especially Rob, when he makes movies about human nature, etc. And of all the plethora of examples of those kinds of things out there, I mean, there's tons of people that have overcome addiction. There's people that have overcome mental health stuff. So those people could have helped, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like Rob even asked them for help. He didn't ask them for guidance. It seems like he just listened to his son. And if you're talking to the addict version of your son, the entitled, spoiled version of your son that's narcissistic and just wants to continue using, listening to that version of them is not going to help one bit.
Reiner was not the only one with famous parents at the Wildwood School, an elite K through 12 with 2 campuses in West LA. And I'm glad it gets into this because I was curious about his younger life. His classmates included the sons of actors Bill Pullman and Robert Downey Jr., but Reiner stood out to John DiCarlo, a friend who met him at Wildwood in kindergarten for his relatively sheltered childhood. I think that's an interesting choice of words, and I'll explain why as we move through here. Reiner wasn't a loner, nor was he super popular, DiCarlo said, an assessment shared by others. He would hang out with the same 2 or 3 guys at the beginning of every class, said Paul Manning, who taught Reiner's phys ed class from 6th through 8th grade. Growing up, he rarely slept out at people's houses, DeCarlo said. In the summertime, instead of going to sleepaway camp or even day camp, his parents would host Camp Reiner at their house for some of the kids from school. I don't think it's sheltered to not do a summer camp. I don't think it's sheltered to not necessarily sleep at other people's houses. I mean, he obviously had a problem with using their bathrooms, but again, I don't think it's sheltered to do those things. On the final day of 8th grade, not having been invited to any end-of-year gatherings, Reiner and DeCarlo decided to smoke marijuana. It was Reiner's first time trying pot, DeCarlo recalled. Reiner said he didn't start dabbling with harder drugs for a couple more years. In a 2016 interview on the podcast Dopey, a comedy show about addiction on which he was frequently a guest.
And we went over several of those episodes of Dopey. That's where we heard more of his lack of empathy when he was telling that story about the woman that ended her own life. He didn't seem to care about that at all.
And I'm going to have to check out some of those podcasts. He told a story about the drug bust that would lead his parents to send him to rehab for the first time. One night when he was 14 or 15, he attended a house party where a friend became so ill after taking drugs, he had to go to the hospital. Afterward, Reiner recalled on the show, he confessed to an adult at the party that he had also taken some pills, including Percocet. The news made its way to Michelle, who, being a hysterical Jewish mother, rushed me to the hospital, he said. Reiner's parents sent him to Visions, an adolescent treatment center for mental health and substance abuse in Malibu, at the ripe young age of 15. He would later describe it as fluffy, replete with private chefs, a pool, yoga, and art classes. One of his roommates at Visions said Reiner was quick to make a goofy joke, endearing him to the fellow patients. At night, the boys would come up with nicknames for staff members. Traffic cop for the former military guy, Paul Blart for a lazy one. His parents were there every single weekend for every session. They really never, ever gave up on him. Unfortunately, right into the end. But again,
So it seems like his parents were willing to put in the footwork and the effort. To me, they were just putting the footwork and effort into the wrong things. They could have worked on their boundaries and consequences. And yeah, Nick was homeless once, but clearly he didn't learn his lesson. If someone doesn't learn their lesson, it doesn't mean you stop having boundaries and consequences. And that's what people end up doing, right? They think, oh, they didn't learn, so we have to remove our boundaries and stop enforcing these consequences. Well, actually, no, that doesn't help them. That doesn't help them one bit.
I'm saying is this is a terrible tragedy, but maybe things would have went different if they gave up on.
Thank you so much for this, Caroline. Thanks so much for your emotionally intelligent analysis. I love this show. Thank you very much, Caroline. Glad to have you here, and I appreciate your support 1,000.
On them earlier. I mean, honestly, if a person causes this much destruction in your life, you got to separate. It was the beginning of the couple's all-consuming, years-long commitment to their son, said many who knew them. They tried everything. A Brentwood mother who met the absolutely miserable couple at a community group where they sought support. The time these two parents spent, they're both very high-powered, busy parents, but it literally felt like they put everything down to be there physically for him. At one point, they had a 24/7 sober companion for him. Unbeknownst to Rob and Michelle, Reiner was being exposed to it.
24/7 sober companions are interesting because years ago they were big. They get paid like $1,000 a day just to watch somebody so they don't use. And it seems like Rob hired someone to do this for Nick. I mean, how helpful they are. I mean, if your sober companion is the only thing keeping you clean, probably not going to work too good, because the second you don't have that sober companion anymore, it's going to be tough. Now, an exception would be maybe if you need to go into a situation where there's going to be booze and you're like, okay, I want to make sure I have a buddy here to keep me okay for this one thing. But on a day-to-day basis, if your sober companion is the only thing saving you from using, just probably not going to end well.
Tantalizing world of hard drugs at Visions. He shared a room with a boy addicted to heroin, he said on Dopey. When I hear for 126 days how good shooting up heroin is every single night, you're going to tell me I'm not going to go out and try effing heroin, he said in 2016. I didn't try heroin until 3 or 4 years later, but the seed was planted. A representative for Visions did not respond to a request for comment. Around age 15 in 2009, Reiner stopped attending school regularly and began working with a private tutor. Again, just kind of a sign. I don't know about, I'd call this one exactly enabling, but it feels like enabling to me. When the lights were on and you conversed with him, he was witty, and being witty takes a certain mental agility, said one person who worked with the family around that time. But Reiner also seemed listless, this person said, expressing concerns about being in the shadow of his father, the filmmaker. You should be, that's one of the problems with the world today is we don't teach gratitude. Younger people, kids don't have gratitude. He should be grateful that his father was so successful and could put him.
Amen to that. We don't teach gratitude, right? And part of that is when people, depending on people's political philosophies, gratitude doesn't get you votes, whether you're Republican or Democrat, right? Or whatever you are, conservative, progressive, fill in the blank. They're always trying to poke your grievances. They're amplifying your grievances and telling you they're going to solve your problems. But gratitude, if they tell you to have gratitude, what problem are they going to solve for you if they're telling you to have gratitude? Or what if you think you're just completely oppressed? How are you supposed to have gratitude if you're completely oppressed? So you see how these things conflict with one another, where it's either, well, most people are going to be a little more dichotomous with it. Either they're going to be grateful and try to live by spiritual principles, or they're oppressed and they're going to try to take down a patriarchy. I mean, that's what you see. Or if you're a conservative, you got to stop the crazy leftists. Where's the gratitude? Gratitude's missing in all of it.
In a position to also be successful, and he shouldn't just be comparing himself to his father. Go out, be your own man. It's just the wrong way to go about things. It's the wrong frame through which to look at the world, which is so sad because they didn't treat him like that or place that burden on him. They would have loved him no matter what, the person said. At 15, when many of his peers began having sex, he said he stole $200 from his parents and hired a sex worker via Craigslist to take his virginity. DeCarlo, Reiner's childhood friend, remembers thinking it was an odd move. Yeah, a little bit odd. But Reiner had done weird stuff before. There was one point where he stole his parents' car and tried to drive to Las Vegas. And I was like, go, Nick. DeCarlo.
I mean, amongst the drug world, that's not really that odd. I mean, that's, of all the things he's done much more odd and eccentric things than that.
Said, it all seemed harmless at the time because I thought he had such a safety net. Things would always go well for him. I could never have imagined that he would truly be destitute because his parents would always be there to take care of him and bail him out of whatever situation he was in. And that is the problem. That in and of itself, that is the problem, the parachute. By the time Reiner was 16, Rob and Michelle were growing tired of his antics and launched him on a more intensive series of interventions. Now listen, yeah, when your child's 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, yeah. And they did all the right things. Like, you try all these things, but at a certain point you have to stop. I'm not saying they should have stopped at this age, but they apparently this continued right up until they ended up dead, which again, very, very tragic. On Dopey,
Doper, Freudian slip. I mean, I'd be curious though what the last 5 years was like. They were saying there was a point where he was stabilized on whatever medicine, and then he wanted to get off of it because he was gaining weight. But I'd be curious what he was like in that 5 years. If they said he was doing so well, which I'm highly skeptical of, but what did that look like? What did that look like if he was doing well? I'd be curious. And who would have the answers to that? His siblings. Romy and Jake, they would know the answer to that.
Reiner said he was sent to a program called Second Nature, a 3.5-month-long wilderness program in Utah, where struggling teens lived outdoors, building fires and cooking their own food. I mean, I would do that for free. Like you wouldn't have to send me out there as part of a struggling group. When the program was completed, Reiner enrolled at Summit Preparatory School, a therapeutic boarding school in Montana. I vividly remember him saying, if I could just get my Escalade and a bunch of cocaine, I'd be fine. That was his end goal, said Chris Crowley, one of 4 boys Reiner shared a room with. Students were allowed to see their parents every 12 weeks. That's a long time. And families participated in group therapy retreats. During these sessions, Crowley said, Reiner argued more loudly with his parents than the other kids did with theirs. Another missing aspect here is respect for parents and authority.
That's a good one, Caroline. We'll read that here. Accountability is not a burden, but a gift you give yourself. It's the act of owning your choices so that you can rewrite your future. I believe that Nick's choice was to remain a victim, and I absolutely agree. It was his choice. Accountability is where our power is. That is empowering. Victimhood is blaming. Victimhood is doing nothing to better yourself. And if you really want to break victimhood, what you have to figure out is, what is my victimhood doing for me? And you really have to be honest about that question. What is it doing for you? Because it is doing something for you. So if I was talking to Nick, I would say, what is your victimhood doing for you? And what he would probably say is something along the lines of, if he was able to be honest about it, well, it's giving me my excuse to not have to do better. Or it's giving me a way to try to get sympathy from other people. That's probably what he would say.
Him and his parents did not get along very well. Crowley said his parents would fly in on a private jet in this little Montana town. They would get into an argument, and then next thing you know, they're flying back out. Summit closed in 2020, and they did not respond to a request for comment. Reiner didn't appear to resent his parents for sending him to treatment after he returned to Los Angeles, DeCarlo said. In between Reiner's stints, and everybody raise your cup, your glass in the air. It's probably going to make me burp a little more, but I think we need a same time sip.
Ah! He's like Pink, raise your glass of Gatorade.
Reiner had returned from Utah and Montana programs with new prescription drugs such as Adderall and Klonopin, which DeCarlo said he, Reiner, and their friends began experimenting with.
Adderall and Klonopin. So Adderall is the ADHD medicine. It's an amphetamine salt. So similar in structure to methamphetamine, by the way. Klonopin is a benzodiazepine. Klonopin and Xanax are probably the most popular benzodiazepines, and they're the only withdrawal that can kill you. Benzo withdrawal can kill you. So Adderall plus Klonopin is a common combination because a lot of people who take Adderall, they'll crash, and then maybe they'll get anxiety, and then they'll take a benzo like Klonopin to come down. It's kind of like a version of a speedball, a speedball's coke and heroin, or meth and heroin.
Those are commonly used street drugs, Adderall and Klonopin. It's very curious to me that they would prescribe that to a drug addict, because people are addicted to these drugs.
Correct. Now, and there's debate on Adderall in particular in the ADHD world. Some people swear by it. Other people say, no, actually, it's a drug of abuse for them. Klonopin's for anxiety. So there's a slippery slope with both of them.
If they tried a drug and nothing bad happened, they felt emboldened to continue their exploration. Parents would say, drugs are bad. And then we would try cocaine. And the next morning we'd be like, whoa, I'm not suddenly a crackhead, DeCarlo said. Then it seemed like we could do any drug. They bought bath salts from a souvenir shop on Hollywood Boulevard and dropped acid in Pan Pacific Park when their parents thought they were seeing a movie at the Grove. Then, when he was 18, Reiner reconnected with a friend from Second Nature. On Dopey in 2016, he recounted how he and his former classmate drove downtown to Skid Row to purchase heroin. Now, I have never been to Los Angeles, and I've only seen Skid Row. Thank you, Riverdale Pilates, for tuning in. And I've never been to Skid Row, but I've seen a lot of videos of it. And you get with this 5 to 10 block area that is basically just run by homeless people. I don't know why it's allowed to exist, but there's a lot of things I don't have the answer to. After what Reiner described as an incredible first experience on the drug, DeCarlo said the two of them began seeking out more on Craigslist. Once, when Reiner and his friends were looking up the medications he had been prescribed in rehab, they were surprised to discover one meant for bipolar disorder. We were just kind of confused by that, DeCarlo said. There was never an indicator to me he had any serious mental health problems. That may have been something that developed later on as he got older, and I just wasn't aware of it, which that commentary will be interesting for Reiner's insanity defense. Since his parents' murders, the New York Times has reported Reiner was diagnosed with both schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder at various points in his life. In 2020, the outlet reported he was placed under a mental health conservatorship that ended a year later. Roughly a month before Rob and Michelle were found dead, a doctor suddenly changed Nick's medication, the Times said. And those are all facts that will support his
And again, I'd still be curious where we're getting all that information from. Was it Alan Jackson? Was it the siblings? Is it the new public defendant? Who's saying it? What doctor's confirming it?
insanity defense. With new addictions mounting, the Reiners sent Nick to Alina Lodge, a New Jersey recovery center, colloquially known in the community as the Last Chance Ranch.
Ha!
Is there a ranch? There's a ranch in New Jersey.
That's where I am. Yours truly. There's a place called New Hope that the addicts would fondly call No Hope. What else would they say? They always got a cynical saying for some of these treatment facilities.
Here, Reiner later recounted on an episode of Dopey that he threw a rock through the stained glass window of the campus chapel after staff refused to give him a certain medication. This could be the beginnings of the violent streak. A former employee at the facility said Reiner was nearly kicked out after the incident, but his parents paid upwards of $20,000 to have the window fixed, and he was allowed to stay another 6 months. See what money buys you? Everything was a joke to him, the former employee said, describing Reiner as violent, angry. He was troublesome, loud in groups, talked out of turn, just disruptive. Again, this life of privilege thought he could do whatever he wanted. He was untouchable. Didn't matter. There were no...
So yeah, people complain about side effects. A psychiatrist will often change their meds. But here's the other thing. If you go off the rails when your meds are changed, then a psychiatrist that's treating you is supposed to notice that too and say, hey, go back on the meds you were stable on. That's what's supposed to happen. But to me, it doesn't sound like that happened if he was even taking the medicine as subscribed or prescribed anyway.
Consequences for him. Representatives for Alina Lodge did not respond to requests for comment. But Reiner left different impressions on different people in different circumstances. After Alina, he was sent to a long-term treatment center in rural Texas called Burning Tree Ranch. So I guess the Last Chance Ranch didn't work. Time to go to the Burning Tree. A patient who was also treated there in 2012 recalled Reiner's dry sense of humor and goofy energy. He arrived just before the Christmas holiday and spent days walking around singing the hook from Paul McCartney's Wonderful Christmas Time. I can't picture that.
I can picture that. Simply having a wonderful Christmas. That song would drive you insane, wouldn't it? If you're hearing that song over and over and again. Holy mackerel. You want to like throw something at him.
Think of that song right now. But Reiner had still not, he would make fun of himself and commiserate about how miserable the circumstances were that he was in. Right. It's miserable, but anytime he could walk back and have money to start a business or do whatever he wants. The former patient said. He recalled Reiner once telling him, "I hope I haven't bleeped up my life so badly that I can't do something with it." But Reiner still had not hit rock bottom. By his own accounts, he refused to attend more rehab programs in subsequent years, and at one point found himself living out of homeless shelters in Maine. He said he befriended an unhoused man a homeless man, who taught him to shoot crack in a McDonald's restroom and inject Wellbutrin intravenously, learning all the good skills you need for life. Afterward, Reiner told the man that his father had once starred on badly that I can't do something with it. But Reiner still had not hit rock bottom. By his own accounts, he refused to attend more rehab programs in subsequent years, and at one point found himself living out of homeless shelters in Maine. He said he befriended an unhoused man a homeless man, who taught him to shoot crack in a McDonald's restroom and inject Wellbutrin intravenously.
Shooting crack. Who the hell shoots crack? You smoke crack. You would shoot meth. And who the hell shoots Wellbutrin? That's wild.
Intravenously, learning all the good skills you need for life. Afterward, Reiner told the man that his father had once starred on All in the Family. The man didn't believe him, so Reiner took out his ID, he recalled on an episode of Dopey. He was like, Rob Reiner's son would not be under a birch tree shooting Wellbutrin. Nick would often seek out his father during his darkest moments. On another episode of Dopey, he recalled once taking acid at his parents' house. I started to have this thought process of like, I'm tripping by myself. God forbid I do a horrible thing like jump out a window or get so disillusioned that I do something crazy. Well, ultimately, that's what happened. He said he couldn't stop thinking about Ariel Castro, a Cleveland man in the news at the time who'd been convicted of kidnapping and raping 3 women. With his mind continuing to spiral into the night, he decided to wake his parents. Michelle retreated to a couch downstairs.
That's a good point there, House. If that's how you pronounce your name. A lot of addicts, they don't have hobbies. What are their hobbies? Getting more drugs, maybe sex, but they're not really hobbies. But like little things that they actually work towards, those are things that addicts really struggle with. They don't have those things. Now, narcissists, they can have some things that they'll use as hobbies because it helps them to get narcissistic supply. The thing that would impress me about a narcissistic person is a hobby that doesn't give them supply in some way. So there's no attention, admiration, or acknowledgement to be getting from it. That would be interesting.
And Rob invited his son to lie next to him on the bed. Calm down, buddy. It's okay. I used to do this in the 60s. You come down eventually, Nick said his father told him. Reiner managed to get clean again, returned to Hollywood around 2014. His dad, fresh off a cameo in The Wolf of Wall Street. Oh, yeah, I remember him in The Wolf of Wall Street. He was like this funny, kind of tough guy dad, but I don't know that that's what he was in real life. And directing Diane Keaton and Michael Douglas in the little scene rom-com, And So It Goes. Asked an executive producer on Fox's Family Guy if he would be willing to give Nick an internship on the show to help keep him on the straight and narrow. The 3-month gig didn't require much responsibility, recalled Andrew Hollinsworth, production assistant who supervised Reiner. For 4 hours each day, he'd help stock snacks, print scripts, and greet celebrities who arrived for recording sessions. Now, that's a pretty cool internship. Rob would drop off Nick and pick Nick up every day. It's not like Rob isn't a busy person, and Mid-City isn't that close to Brentwood. It's really admirable from that side. Yeah, I feel like all of this attention, though, from his parents was counterproductive. Hollinsworth said people in the studios found Nick to be a really interesting, dynamic person who was refreshingly honest about his previous struggles. Sounds like a good point in his life. He felt like his family were all these pristine, amazing people, and he was sort of the F up of the family. We sort of had heart to hearts, and I was like, you have everything in front of you, all the best connections in the world. What do you want to do? That's what I mean. You really can't hit rock bottom if you're in a family like that. He said he wanted to start stand-up comedy. During the internship, Hollinsworth said,
and again, I think they were on the right track, letting him get homeless. That can be close to a rock bottom. But for him, it just wasn't good enough. It wasn't enough. So if it's not enough, you got like it's so hard for parents, but you gotta let them go. You gotta let them do their thing and kind of burn themselves out. For me, that's what was true. Like no one was going to get me clean unless I wanted to. I just burned myself out.
Reiner started performing at a handful of reputable comedy clubs, including the Comedy Store. No footage of these sets could be found. Reiner also began working on a project that would eventually turn into the 2016 film Being Charlie, which he co-wrote with Matt Elisofan, a friend he met in rehab. Initially, the duo envisioned the story as a half-hour sitcom. It evolved into an hour-long comedy drama that Rob's production company, Castle Rock, pitched to various networks. When no one was interested, Rob and Reiner and Elisofan turned the script into a film that Rob agreed to direct. All along, I, for a lack of better way of coping, had been asking myself, what can I do to make art of this? Rob told the New Yorker. Now that Nick was doing better, I told them, maybe we can make it a movie. And that's really not a bad idea. You know, turn your pain into art, turn your pain into
pain into purpose, as they say. And that's on the right track. The difference is, and the problem was, Nick was really disconnected from his father at this point. His heart wasn't in it. And if you listen to him on the Dopey podcast, he's basically saying, oh yeah, I was still using. So it wasn't authentic. It wasn't a genuine story about him. So he didn't get the internal rewards of doing something like that. Like, what would you feel like if you're still using, trying to make a movie about someone like getting clean? You're not going to feel it, right? You're going to feel like, wow, I'm a little bit of a fraud in this movie, right? But it's going to seem incongruent.
Your suffering and your trials into something productive. Nick would later tell Dopey co-host the film's team urged him to discuss his sobriety while promoting the film, but he was in fact still smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol during the press circuit. Yeah, you can't put on, a fake sobriety story. It's like, there's not really a sobriety story here. I don't got addiction licked by any means, Reiner admitted to Howard Stern during an interview with his dad that year. And I'm still very young, so who knows what will happen in 5 years. I mean, one thing I'll say about him is at least he was honest. Ultimately, the film made less than 33,000 worldwide and received poor reviews. Reiner tried to keep his creative career going. In 2017, began working on a documentary about his grandfather, Carl Reiner. But a little over a year after Being Charlie was released, he relapsed. After reconnecting with one of his old drug dealers, Reiner said,
and you could argue he had never been clean. If he's smoking weed and drinking, he's not clean. The addiction just progressed again to a real hardcore relapse, but it doesn't sound like he was ever clean.
On Dopey, he got totally spun up on uppers and cocaine, stayed up for days in a row, and wrecked his parents' guest house. He punched a television and a lamp and was put on a plane with an interventionist to yet another treatment program. During the flight, he said he had a cocaine heart attack. That can't be fun. Passed out, woke up in a hospital in Boston. On one of his last appearances on Dopey in 2018, Reiner said he was smoking weed to prevent himself from smoking any other hard thing right now. I mean, I guess that can be effective, but it's not a good long-term answer. It's just a substitute drug. Living life as a functional addict was Reiner's ideal situation, said DiCarlo. That's not a good situation for anybody. I think that's what he really wanted. Like, maybe one day, once I'm old enough, my parents are just going to step aside and realize that I can do drugs and it's not going to destroy me.
I mean, there are some functional addicts out there and alcoholics, but they're rare. That's not the most common thing. But again, what society is going to care about? Are you actually being productive? Are you holding it together and you're not harmful to other people at the very least? That's what they're going to really look at. There's people that, they drink coffee throughout the day. Some people smoke weed throughout the day, and they're not really that poor off, right? They're still doing all right. It's not until you start heavily drinking or other hardcore drugs where you're just not going to be able to function anymore. And it's going to take over your entire life. It'll destroy your relationships and finances, and you're left with nothing. And you wind up with jails, institution, and death. Or in this case, the death of other people.
Yeah, that's not what happened. What they should have done is they should have stepped aside and, let you do what you had to do. But as much as he wanted to escape his parents' rules, he needed his security blanket of living in a comfy house where he could make a mess or leave dirty dishes and not have to make his bed because someone else would take care of it. Reiner rarely left his family's property during this period. And when he did, his parents and their staff kept close tabs on him. According to a friend of the family who stayed with the Reiners from 2016 to 2019, Reiner cloistered himself in the guest house above the family's billiard and screening rooms, a few steps from his parents' residence. He had to cook in the main house where his family placed a camera after he accidentally left the burner on, got distracted, and almost burned down the effing house. Signs eventually emerged he was using again. He would run to the gate to get deliveries for things that clearly weren't food, or suddenly it would start smelling like Febreze in the billiard room. His behavior became more volatile, screaming, yelling, cursing, throwing things, to the point where an employee who had worked in the home for 20 years threatened to quit because he was genuinely scared of Reiner. I don't blame you. And there's nothing you can do in a situation like that. I mean, he's the prince. He's the son of the king. One morning, the friend sat with Rob drinking coffee before the rest of the house awoke. It's like a mansion prison. If I knew it could be this bad with one kid, I wouldn't have had any, Rob said. Still, Rob and Michelle were reluctant to escalate matters. To place an involuntary psychiatric hold on Reiner, Rob would have had to watch the cops wrestle.
And that's the thing also. As a parent, you feel extremely powerless to help your kids. And it's not a very fun feeling. You feel like you're trying to do anything you can to help your kid. But unfortunately, when it comes to addiction and mental health, they are the hardest things to help someone with because in a way, they got to figure it out a little bit on their own. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need support, but it is up to them to at least get that mindset shift going. Okay, I'm going to try to improve my attitude, put in the footwork, and try to work on my recovery. And a part of this comes down to me, if you're coming from all that money, you just don't feel like you have to do that. Most of us, we have to do something to put food on the table. We got to do something productive and have some kind of work. And honestly, he probably should have been forced to get some kind of job, honestly. It might have been good for him to have a little bit of a community, even if it was just a work community. But it doesn't seem like they ever did that.
With my kid to the ground, handcuff him to a stretcher, put him in a psych ward. I don't want to live through that. DeCarlo last saw Reiner in person in 2020. After Rob and Michelle were killed and his friend was arrested, he checked his Facebook messages for the first time in a while and saw that Reiner had been asking to hang out and reconnect. Well, you can't blame yourself, buddy. Regretfully, it seemed like he'd been reaching out to me kind of a bit over the last couple of months, and I just have been dealing with my own things. So a lot of the messages went unresponded to on my end. DeCarlo has since scheduled a forthcoming visit to Twin Towers Correctional Facility where Reiner is being held without bail. DeCarlo said he's reached out to some of the other old friends to check if anybody else wants to go with him. No one has yet to take him up on the offer. And that's the end of the article. Colorfully titled Inside Nick Reiner's Life of Privilege, Pills, and Pain. So my takeaways from this article is that, I still think as far as the insanity defense that he's got a good shot, but, drug addiction is not insanity. So his lawyers are going to have to do.
This is the one thing I disagree with him on. I don't think he's got a good shot at the insanity defense. And again, this is a defense lawyer though. So that could be part of his reasoning here. He wants to kind of give you that perspective, but I don't think it's going to be, he's not going to get it. I agree much more with Maureen than him on that part.
Do a good job of distinguishing between the two. And, can someone become psychotic, schizophrenic later in life? I believe absolutely yes. So they're going to have an argument, but the prosecution is just going to argue that he was basically this entitled brat who was enabled his entire life, and that this was basically him just being sick of his parents and probably whacked out on drugs, but not insane, not schizophrenic at the time of the homicide. It's going to be a really interesting case, and it's going to come down to experts. And you never know, like if the brother and sister are on board with a plea deal, the prosecution, they'll listen to the family. They might allow him to do the guilty but insane plea deal and basically live out his life in a mental hospital instead of a state penitentiary. But I think the biggest lesson from this whole tragedy, honestly, is if your kids are out of control drug addicts like this, don't enable them. Don't enable them, especially well into adulthood. I mean, do everything you can early on. But if you get into decades, I think there's a point where you have to cut them off, and it might work for them. It might not. But more importantly, to keep your own self safe, your own family safe from these people who sadly can become very dangerous.
And again, if they're going to be a danger to other people or even themselves, that's where you got to have that involuntary commitment, in my opinion. That's something that they don't have right now in California for longer than 72 hours. But to me, that can save lives. It can save other people's lives, and it can save their life too, because probably more often than murder, some people might end their own life. So in both ways, though, an involuntary commitment can save lives. I do think that's something to learn from this case and try to implement moving forward. And that might have saved Irina in North Carolina on the train too.
So this doesn't alter my opinion. I still think they're going to go with insanity. I still think he has a pretty darn good chance of an insanity defense, but this story favors the prosecution overall. So the defense is going to need some good experts to really opine, give their opinion on why he was insane at the time of the murder. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. My name is Joe Palmetto, Joe the Lawyer. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I'm looking to grow my channel.
Joe the Lawyer. Check him out.
This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for.
Here's what investigators aren't saying publicly yet, but what people close to this case are thinking. The violence inside that Brentwood home reportedly wasn't typical, even by homicide standards. Some of the reporting that's coming out, Harvey Levin and TMZ, who has sources inside the investigation, people in the medical examiner's office, saying they were deeply disturbed by what they saw. Levin described the killings as incredibly brutal and said the scene had, and I'm quoting here directly, all the makings of a meth murder. That's a significant thing to say when toxology results haven't been publicly confirmed. But here's what forensic research tells us about cases like this. When investigators see overkill, violence that far exceeds what's necessary to end someone, the first assumption is actually usually wrong. The instinct is that excessive violence means personal rage, intimate connection, and sometimes that's true. But the research says the first thing you should do is expedite toxicology, because stimulant-induced violence produces the exact same pattern: prolonged, frenzied, excessive, detached from a rational motive. So the question isn't just what allegedly happened in that house, it's what state Nick Reiner was in when it allegedly happened. We're going to get into all of this today. What the evidence shows as of right now, what we actually know, and what may have taken place here. As we do, join us in this conversation on YouTube in the comment section or on our Substack. You can chat directly with us in the studio right there. It's free to join. You get all of our videos, all of our reporting a day before we put them out publicly everywhere else, and there's no ads. So if you want to get in on that right now, it's absolutely free to join. There's no paywall up right now on our Substack. And a lot of Substacks is paywall. We don't have one as of right now. So if you want to get in on the ground floor before everybody else, check it out. The link is in the description. All right, let's start with what's been reported about his mental health, because the family narrative has emphasized this part of the story. According to the New York Times, Nick was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder around 2020, a condition that combines symptoms of schizophrenia with significant mood disorder symptoms. It was serious enough that a judge placed him under an LPS conservatorship that year, which is a legal mechanism in California reserved for adults so gravely disabled by mental illness they cannot provide for their own basic needs. We've talked about this. We've done videos on this. If you want to learn more about just how broken that system itself is, check it out on our channel. As one expert told the Times, of all the people who come into this system, a very small group actually get placed on a conservatorship, and that is true. Sources told multiple outlets that Nick had been on medication that was working. He was reportedly stable, but according to TMZ, about a month before the killings, he complained to his doctors about weight gain, which is a common side effect of antipsychotics, and his doctors reportedly accommodated the request and switched his medication. What happened next, according to sources, was rapid destabilization. His behavior reportedly became erratic and dangerous. TMZ reported he had a complete break from reality around the time of the alleged murders. So, does a medication change explain what allegedly happened? Or do you need more ingredients in this pie to make it have the flavor that it did? Well, it could explain part of it. The clinical literature confirms that medication transitions in schizoaffective patients can cause significant destabilization, paranoia, disorganized thinking, even psychotic breaks. But here's what the research also tells us. The violence profile of psychotic decompensation alone tends to be reactive and disorganized. The MacArthur study on mental disorder and violence, one of the most comprehensive analyses ever conducted, found the strongest predictors of violent behavior in psychiatric patients weren't delusions or hallucinations. They were substance abuse and psychopathy. Mental illness can explain instability, doesn't automatically explain sustained excessive brutality. And this is where we have to talk about the part of Nick Reiner's history that gets mentioned briefly and move past, because this was never just a story about mental illness. It was always a story about dual diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder and serious addiction, serious polysubstance.
And not only that, the personality disorder, vulnerable narcissism, character disorder. To me, that's maybe even the most important one. How do we know? Because mental health and addiction alone isn't necessarily enough to do those things. In most cases, it is rare for people with schizophrenia to be violent. It is rare for people that don't have a personality disorder of sorts to be violent, honestly. And next, now that I think of it, that's actually a good debate question. Like, do you think most abusive people have a personality disorder? There's certainly debate on this topic, by the way. People like the guy who wrote Why Does He Do That? Lundy Bancroft. Lundy Bancroft would say they don't. He says they don't have personality disorders. I don't know if I agree with him on that. Again, I would say at the very least they have some dark triad tendencies, or at the very least they're an asshole. But what do you think, chap?
Addiction. Nick documented this himself publicly. from the Dopey podcast between 2016 and 2018. In his own words, he talked about heroin, cocaine, shooting crack. He estimated 18 rehab stints by his teenage years, multiple periods of homelessness. He described his recovery approach as harm reduction. Still smoking weed, taking Adderall, trying to stay away from what he called coke, meth, and heroin. And he described violent behaviors while on the stimulant.
And harm reduction can have its place if you're going to die otherwise. But again, I don't know if harm reduction is necessarily always a good long-term solution. It just depends.
In a 2018 episode, Nick recounted being, his words, totally spun out on uppers, coke, and something else in his parents' guest house. Up for days. He said he started destroying things, the TV, the lamp, everything in the guest house got wrecked. He described going 10 rounds with the furniture. He also described having what he called a cocaine heart attack during his trip to Boston. This was an ancient history. This was 2018. And that documented pattern, stimulant binges, violent outbursts, destruction, it matters when you're trying to understand what allegedly happened in December of 25. Here's what the clinical literature about schizoaffective disorder and stimulant use says. Research published in the Journal of Medical Case Report states schizoaffective disorder is highly likely to be worsened by the use of stimulants. Stimulants intensify psychotic symptoms and may also cause an onset of psychosis. A study in the NIH archive found that in those with chronic psychotic illness, comorbid illicit amphetamine, that use can exacerbate active psychosis or cause a relapse of psychotic illness that was previously in remission. And here's what should concern anyone dealing with dual diagnosis. Exacerbation of psychotic illnesses by stimulants is not necessarily prevented by existing compliance with antipsychotic medication. So even if you're taking your psych meds, stimulants can break through and trigger a psychotic episode. So consider what that could mean for someone like Nick Reiner if, and this is speculation based on his documented history, if he was using stimulants during a vulnerable medication transaction or transition, you're not adding problems. You're multiplying them. You're pouring gasoline on an already unstable fire. And he knew this is what happens. Now, the circumstantial details that have emerged because there's a pattern worth examining here are interesting. After the alleged killings, Nick was arrested near Exposition Park in downtown. That's about 15 miles from Brentwood. At an Arco gas station, buying Gatorade, carrying a red backpack. He did not resist. Some call the area a drug den in that general area. That's at least according to the TMZ documentary, reporting and Nick was allegedly using meth after his medication change. To be clear, this has not been officially confirmed by investigators. The night before the alleged murders, Conan O'Brien's holiday party was going on. We've all heard about this. Multiple sources who were there described Nick's behavior to reporters as bizarre. According to People magazine, he was freaking everybody out, acting crazy. Kept asking people if they were famous. He reportedly got into a loud argument with his father, loud enough that multiple guests heard it and were uncomfortable. After his arrest, sources described him to TMZ as almost childlike in jail, seemingly unaware of why he was in custody. That kind of disassociation can indicate severe psychotic break. It can also indicate the aftermath of stimulant psychosis.
It can also indicate someone who's trying to avoid responsibility and accountability by being harmless and acting like an innocent victim fly.
Or both. Or someone making shit up, too. That's a possibility. So what does meth-related violence actually look like, according to the research? Well, the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law found methamphetamine use is an independent risk factor for violence perpetration. And that risk is largely independent of psychotic symptoms. The drug itself changes behavior. Violence and the violence pattern in meth-related crime, according to forensic literature, prolonged attacks, frenzied behavior, excessive injury far beyond what's necessary, chaotic scenes, actions detached from rational motive. Levin said on the record, if he were just Nick Reiner without something additional, the carnage wouldn't have been the way it was. As someone with sources inside this investigation right there saying publicly the violence level suggests something beyond psychiatric destabilization alone. Here's the uncomfortable inventory of what's been reported. Nick has documented schizoaffective disorder. Court-ordered conservatorship, level serious. His medication was reportedly changed about a month before. Sources say it destabilized him. He has a documented history of stimulant use, including violent outbursts while on uppers, his own words, on public podcasts. He was arrested in the area described as a drug market, and TMZ reports he was allegedly using meth after his medication change, though this hasn't been officially confirmed. The violence level reportedly disturbed experienced investigators. He presented afterward as disassociated, confused, almost childlike. Toxology results have not been publicly released or confirmed as of yet. The pattern suggests this may have not just been medication change gone wrong. But until we have the confirmed toxology, that remains informed speculation, not established fact. What and why does this matter for the case? If the toxology comes back clean, the defense has a cleaner path to an insanity argument. Psychiatric break due to medication change, grave mental illness. If the toxology shows stimulants, the picture gets legally complicated. Voluntary intoxication is generally not a defense to murder. If you choose to use drugs that contribute to your actions, you're typically still responsible. What was in Nick Reiner's system matters enormously, and the violence pattern combined with his documented history suggests that question deserves serious examination. None of this diminishes the tragedy. Rob and Michelle Reiner reportedly spent decades trying to help their son, treatment after treatment. They made a movie with him about his struggles. They let him live in their guest house. They brought him to a Christmas party the night before they died. The tragedy isn't just that they allegedly lost their lives at their son's hand. It's that this may have been all preventable if someone had asked the right questions about what Nick was really doing, not just what medications he was taking. Dual diagnosis is one of the most dangerous combinations in mental health. Serious psychiatric illness.
I think the issue, Ellie, is it's not that he's a boring speaker, like you said. He's just going over the same things over and over and over again about the case. And he's not really going into the newer details that Brian Etten did. And they're not newer details. They're just new things coming out. Or even the way Joe the lawyer did.
Illness plus substance abuse. The substance destabilizes the illness drives the person towards substances, a feedback loop that can escalate until something catastrophic happens. The violence reportedly seen in that Brentwood home tells a story. According to forensic literature, psychiatric decomposition alone doesn't typically produce what's been described. Stimulant-fueled rage does. The combination of destabilized psychosis and meth can produce exactly the kind of prolonged, frenzied, excessive violence that sources say disturbed investigators. We don't have the...
Doesn't even need to be that. It doesn't even need to be meth, though. Would I be surprised if he was? No. But it could have been a Michael McKee situation. I mean, was anyone thinking Michael McKee was on drugs when he did what he did? Not that I've heard mentioned. All we've talked about in that case is the domestic violence element, the narcissist losing of control element. Nowhere have we said, oh, was he drunk? Or was he high on meth? I mean, is it possible he had a couple drinks to kind of give him the courage to go through with it? Maybe. Would that also explain the messy crime scene and leaving of the shells? Maybe. But again, the point is, it's not necessary. It's not necessary for them to do it.
toxology confirmation. What we have is Nick's documented history of stimulant abuse, including violent behavior while on uppers, an arrest location described as a drug area, a violence profile that matches stimulant-related patterns in forensic research, and sources saying publicly this had all the makings of a meth murder. The family's narrative, he was getting better. Just medication.
Again, and it's certainly possible it was a meth murder. The only point I'm making is it's not mandatory.
Change. Maybe what they believed. Because if he was using, they probably didn't know. But the reported evidence suggests there may have been more happening than anyone wanted to see. Nick is charged with murdering his parents. He's presumed innocent until proven guilty. Whatever was allegedly in his system, whatever was allegedly happening in his head, understanding what actually occurred, not the sanitized version, it matters. For this case, for families dealing with similar situations, for anyone trying to understand how he was doing better, allegedly becomes the worst crime scene investigation seen in years. The violence, if the reports are accurate, was the tell. And that tell is pointing somewhere specific. Give me your thoughts, and we'll continue this conversation in the comments section. Either on YouTube, Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi is where you find us there, or on our Substack, where you can get all of our videos, all of our reporting, all of it a day before we release it anywhere else. You can binge on it there. There's no ads, and it's free. There's no paywall right now. So get in on that. The link is in the description, hiddenkillers.substack.com. Look forward to continuing our conversation on both of those platforms. And hey, if you're on Apple Podcasts, let me ask you this real quick. Have you left us a review there yet? If what happened inside the Reiner family over 20.
Let's see what we think of Robin Dreek here, another retired FBI special agent and author.
Years, because Rob Reiner isn't stupid. He's a successful director, a public intellectual, a man who had resources and connections. Michelle wasn't naive. These were accomplished people who had access to the best treatment money could buy. And yet by the end, Rob was publicly saying they should have listened to Nick instead of the professionals. They brought a son who'd been exhibiting erratic behavior to a party full of their friends. They went to sleep in a house with someone who, according to sources, was in the middle of a psychiatric crisis. Something fundamentally shifted in how they perceived threat. I want to understand how that happens. How does a family go from calling the police in 2019 to, sleeping in the same house with them December 13th, 2025, right over there? He's in the guest house. He's good. What could possibly go wrong? Even when he is seeming to be in kind of a crisis mode here. Robin Dreek, retired FBI special agent, chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, is with us to help us break more of this down. Robin, from your perspective, what does it look like when someone has successfully basically trained their family to distrust outside experts and go along with their, their madness?
Nick has a lot of years of reps of manipulating perceptions of those around him for his own gain. All you have to do is be around anyone, or if you know someone that's been around someone that's a severe, deep addict, to know the skill set they have to get what they want when they need it. It is remarkable. It is destructive. It is sad. And so who knows, because we weren't inside that family, it's all conjecture, but I think there's a lot of trauma bonding. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of denial. And I think part of that denial was the ability to buy the services, buy the programs, and thinking that they could buy their way out of situations, buy Nick's way out of things. Basically, I think their wealth masked the severity of what was going on. And I think Nick was boiling for so long, and he was doing and saying the right things that they like Nick knew what they needed to hear to get them to take an action. And so he got very adept at doing that. And that's why I go back to the behaviors of trust. He was able to manipulate them just enough by giving them some transparency, owning his behavior. Oh yeah, I know I'm having a problem. This has been he did all the right things coming out of rehab. So he comes out of rehab, people have hope. And then he starts spiraling down again. And when he starts spiraling down again, he's probably being transparent. to a point, except the fact he's using again. And then it just escalates down again. And then he probably uses sympathy for, oh, please help me, please help me. And so they then get sucked back into the vortex again. Because hope is a great thing as a species to have because it helps us propel ourselves forward. But when you have false hope and it's destructive hope, it can be crushing because
you can consider that what? Toxic empathy or naive understanding. There comes a point where you don't want to be a doormat. But if you have too much naive understanding where you're disrespecting yourself in order to try to help someone else, that's a bad sign. That's a bad sign. You're crossing a red line. And again, this is going to be the hardest when you're a parent and the person you're trying to help is one of your kids. Because, yeah, when they're a kid, you do that. You do overlook those things because they're your kid. But there comes a point where once they're an adult or even into their teen years a little bit, there comes a point when you got to let them sink or swim.
if it goes nowhere, then it's just a pattern of the total destruction. And that's why the objectivity of outside people is really, really important. Someone outside the family has got to see the arc, because this was an arc and it was arcing downward the entire time. And it just never deviated from that arc, because he got every single rehab. He got better and better and better at saying exactly what he needed to say, what he needed to get, being Nick.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's an interesting point by Robin. So basically he's saying he became a better manipulator by going to these rehabs. He just learned how to say more of what he needed to say so he could continue doing what he wanted to do. And again, the only person that is going to be able to see through that, other professionals, or more likely other addicts who have been clean, they'll see right through it in a blink and they'll say, yeah, this he's not being genuine here. He's lying. He's manipulating. Other addicts are pretty good at spotting other addicts' BS.
All the way to let's make a movie about this, and you guys profess how I'm right and you're wrong about the help that I should be getting. And this, it's an interesting dynamic in this case. We oftentimes see cases where it's a spouse type dynamic where there's some sort of issue, and you have either separation or, one gives up on the other at some point. It's a little different when it's a child, when it's your own child. It just is. And I don't think there's any parent out there that gives a damn about their kid that's ever going to.
And agree. That's exactly what I said. So I agree with Tony there. It is the hardest when it's your kid, but it doesn't make it any less important.
To be able to have false hope about something with their kid of them getting better.
Right.
The outside can look at it going in, and the objectivity can certainly be there. It's easy for us to look at somebody else's kid or family situation and go, they're sitting there with false hope. There's just nothing's going to happen. But you're never going to get through to the parent, to Rob or to Michelle, that this is a hopeless situation, because they're always going to hold out hope, or it's going to kill them. And the latter happened.
I think one of the things that was the beautiful thing about the Reiners that actually might, again, conjecture, and I always got to make sure I say that, they were so empathetic. They were so caring, so generous. They were everything you could hope to be as just a beautiful human being you want to be around. And the problem is when you're dealing with someone, I, again, don't know about Nick and what he scales on this, but when you start dealing with someone that is a total manipulator and, start maybe edging up on psychopathy only because of lack of emotion for the actions you're taking, people like the Reiners become very, very susceptible to manipulation because, and I think we heard this from the language Nick used before, even in the video he made with his dad, the movie, was shame. Yeah. Shame is a powerful motivator for people that feel very deeply. And if Nick was using shame, blaming his parents, again, Nick was and still is a massive wound collector. And when you're dealing with a wound collectors are going to place that blame.
And that's that term again, the old wound collector term. I think there's probably better ways to say it though than a wound collector. It's really just someone who is like building up their case of slights and resentments, right? They're trying to collect their grievances.
For everyone around.
Because it's actually not correct to call it a wound. It's not a wound. They're perceiving it as things, but that doesn't mean it's true.
Around them. And if you see someone vulnerable to shame, and I think his parents, probably because they cared so much about him, they blamed themselves for everything that was going on in his life. And so what Nick did was he probably capitalized on that emotion to double down, to squeeze the living hell out of them in every way he possibly could.
It makes you wonder now what's going on with Nick. Obviously, he, as of this recording, is in custody. He's apparently is off suicide watch, but insider sources say he believes there's a conspiracy against him. And I can get why he may feel that way, because finally the world has shifted and has said, yeah, we're holding you accountable.
Right.
That would feel conspiratorial if the world is your entire 32 years of existence said, do whatever you want. Might feel a little weird. But I do wonder, as he sobers up, as they get his meds in check, and maybe sobers up is the wrong word because I don't know if he was using or not. So that's just conjecture. But as they get his meds in check, because we know that there was that medication issue, he's going to recognize, he certainly has demonstrated in the past, he is cognizant of his surroundings, can live a fairly functional life in the free world without killing people until he did, but have a sense of autonomy, a sense of how to work the system, how to work people. I don't understand. I don't see why this would be any different. He's now fighting for his life, basically. So why on earth would he not now use every tool in his toolbox? And if one of those tools is, I got to play crazy, he's going to play crazy. It's going to be, how do they determine what's play and what's not?
And again, it all comes down to what version of Nick are you talking to? Are you talking to the version of Nick that just wants to continue using? You have to be aware of that. Or are you talking to the version of Nick that actually wants what's best for him? You have to know this distinction because they can be two very different things.
It's really interesting, when we think about Nick and, as you laid it out like that, so let's place ourselves in his shoes the best we can, do that thought experiment with deep empathy, not empathy like compassion, that's empathy in action. But, what's he been through? What's his reps? And so his reps are using the manipulation skill set he has, but only really with his parents, because his parents provided, again, from what we understand, this massive top cover for him. Mm-hmm. And so he might have a lot of years of reps, but it's a very, very tight audience he used those reps with. And so he doesn't have a skill set of dealing with different people, different situations, different organizations. I think he only has reps with a very, very small group of people. Mm-hmm. And so I think he's going to, I don't think any of it's, and that's probably why he thinks it's a conspiracy, because he's used to everyone buying his shit.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone is anymore. But for one thing, he's not likable. And that is a huge detriment to, when you look at him, when you listen to him, when you hear the situation, people automatically judge within seconds if you like someone or don't. Here's a great example. Luigi Mangione. Mm-hmm. Equally abhorrent in my book, because he cold-bloodedly killed a stranger on the street because he was trying to make a statement against the CEO of a healthcare organization. Yet, mm-hmm. you got people flocking his side because they think he's likable, because he's got presence, because he's good, all these things. Mm-hmm. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And yet Nick, he does not have that same kind of charisma, that same kind of appearance, and he thinks he does, I think, and because he's used to the same kind of attention, and is falling flat. I think if it goes to jury, again, if he is tried and regularly without any kind of plea of insanity, it ain't going to go well for him.
No, his only hope here is going to be, not guilty by reason of insanity. I'm sure he'll probably go down that route. you know, and then it somehow being one of
bar.
those cases like the Carmichael, you know, where, well, in there for a little bit and then you get out, or, you know, we just don't know. They could play out. It ends up being out of the hands of a jury. It ends up being out of the hands of law enforcement. It ends up being in the hands of the mental health system and the state saying yes or no, you're safe to go or not, depending on if there's a sentence there or not. At the end of the day, I mean, he's likely to end up somewhere. In your opinion, based on everything we know about this case, based on everything we know about his history, once he's medicated here and he's back to, you know, being, you know, quote unquote himself, and it's not in the middle of a transition of medication, where do you think he should end up? Do you think this is a man who should be in prison, or is this a man who should be in a mental health facility for the rest of his life?
Prison number 1, mental health facility number 2. I say number 1.
Either or. He just needs to be locked up for the rest of his life. He is very broken. And actually, I was looking at the laws of probability, looking at past cases, and the likelihood of him, again, just looking at stats purely on the behavior arc in past cases, I created a number for this. I think the likelihood of him being able to plead insanity in California is only around 16 to 20% chance.
Yeah.
So, which means he's going to jail. He's I think he's doing time on the rock.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be like if they reopen it. Who knows? It's Tuesday, so you know, who knows? But yeah, there's just I think there's this is a case where things, you know, parallel truths can be accurate. He may not have known what he was doing at that moment in time, and may very well qualify under California law to be not guilty by reason of insanity at that moment. But how much are you going to hold him accountable for getting there, for the journey that took him to being in that sort of place where he could get, you know, or this is a med change. I guess I think a big factor is going to come down to what else was in his system. If there's other drugs, and it's like, sorry, buddy, you made that choice on your own. Right.
And so this is where I'm way out of my field. You know, my good friend, Dr. Chris Mahoney, would tell you, you know, we got to look at the data. We got to look at getting a professional assessment. But from the research I did, in general, people that are schizophrenics are not violent in general. And so, in other words, you can't really claim reason, and that's why the percentage of him being able to be not guilty by reason of insanity or claim that as an excuse.
And that is true. Most people with schizophrenia are not violent.
Is really low, because if he is diagnosed by the clinician of being schizophrenic, the probability of a schizophrenic being violent to the degree that Nick was is also extremely low. Now, if drugs were an exasperating factor in this, that then the state says is a choice.
Yep.
And so he's now accountable for the choices he made to do exactly what he did. That's why the probability of him being able to claim innocent by reason of insanity, I think, is very low. From, again, not a clinician side, but from what I've read and researched, it's a high bar he's going to be able to have to hurdle to do it. And I don't think he's going to be able to do it. That's going to be
a very big determining factor in what happens next in all of this. Robin Dreeke, retired FBI special agent, chief of the counterintelligence behavioral analysis program, whose new book is right behind you. You know, this is hold up
and
the
right
book
here.
time.
And Tony,
and right
yours
here.
is on the way. It should be there any day.
And maybe I can reach out to this guy too, Robin Dreeke, to get him on the show and read his book.
Awesome. I haven't checked the mail yet today. Anyway, go check it out. It's Not All About Me. It's available on pre-order right now, wherever you get books.
It's Not All About Me. Interesting.
And there's plenty of other ones too that are available right now. Unbreakable Alliance is the one you had right before that, also available.
Shameless plug. Thank you so much.
Go check them out. All right. Your thoughts in the comment section. That's where we can continue the conversation on YouTube in the comments or on our Substack, hiddenkillers.substack.com. The link is in the description to continue our conversation over there. Until next time, for Rob.
All right. Well, that's pretty much it here today. I was thinking about doing a Tim Dillon video about no contact. We'll see here.
But the point of this whole thing, I guess, is that kids are going no contact from their parents, right? This is something that's happening. David and Victoria Beckham, family drama pulls in a generation unafraid to go no contact. You know, people are basically giving up on the idea of family, which, by the way, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm saying I'm pro-family. I'm very much that. Not my family, but I'm pro other people's families. No, I am. I'm pro families I see when I'm out. I'm pro them. I'm pro your family. I like that whole idea. My family personally is I'm not super pro them, but the institution of family, and there's people in my family that I'm for, and there's people that I'm not for. I'm not against them, but there are people that we've decided mutually that there's nothing, and nothing is worth.
Well, remember, real sir, honor thy father and mother does not mean you have to put up with their abuse and disrespect. That's also not what it means.
Worse than a fake family. You have to be a real family or nothing. That's what I think no contact is. I think no contact is people just going, I think we're not going to pretend anymore to do the bullshit. We either love each other and we're an actual family, which again, I am for on the record, or we're this other thing.
Hey, I get behind it, Tim Dillon. He's basically saying, rather than have dishonest harmony, pull off that Band-Aid and say, screw it. Like, if you're not really connecting, what are you really losing? And again, it's up to everyone what they want to do. Sometimes there could be a relationship that could be cultivated, but sometimes it's like trying to get blood from stone, as they say.
This thing that's like we feel obligated, but no one likes it, and it's not for anybody, and it doesn't matter, and it's only a few times a year, and we're trying to like get out of it. I'm not saying there's not value in a limited relationship with your family, but people are not as into that now. This is something that is happening. You know, people don't seem to be as into like, and some of it is political. Some of it is political. I said last episode, there are people who like Donald Trump more than their children. There's nothing to be done about that. And there's people that hate Donald Trump more than they love their sister or brother. And that's where we're at as a country, where people go, yeah, we grew up together. We shared a room for 10 years. You cried on my shoulder when your boyfriend dumped you. You know, we were there together when we found out mom got killed by that drunk driver. But I can't get past your support for tariffs. I can't. I won't.
And again, and you have to remember, Tim Dillon is a comedian as well. So he's trying to make some points while mixing in some comedy.
Won't. Don't you understand? It's a tax paid by the people, whatever it is. There are people who've just decided that their political allegiances mean more to them. They get more happiness out of it. Here's the thing. I could bemoan this. I could say, and I will, that it's a terrible development, right? Like it's bad, and it is. But you know, like it's obvious that you shouldn't care about, like, I don't know, you know, Greenland or something more than your own family. You know, I'm just pulling that out of thin air. But people are not getting as much enjoyment out of their family as they are out of either loving or hating Donald Trump. It's the old.
And that's the part of it we don't talk about as much in this space, but that does prompt a lot of no contact. Politics certainly does.
Ultimate drug that people
And to be clear, it's not the only reason, but it does become a prominent reason for many.
they will not get reconnecting with their brother and reminiscing about old times. Whatever happened to that bar? Remember you met that crazy chick in that bar? That's not going to do it anymore, because in the middle of that human moment that two human beings are having about a human event that happened a long time ago, one of them is going to look at their phone to just find Donald Trump. It doesn't matter how personal the anecdote is. It doesn't matter how deeply they are trying to connect. It doesn't matter. They could be talking about how mom fought her cancer and she called us into the room. We all held hands. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whether they love or hate Trump, it doesn't matter. They, in the middle of that, they're going to look at their phone and they're going to find Donald Trump. I'm telling you, it won't matter what they're talking about. The time where you could imagine that happening, like they're in a tiny house in Pennsylvania. It's not tiny. It's whatever. It's totally respectable size. And it's a suburb and it's autumn and people are finally meeting each other and they're meeting their families. And there's a profound human moment there where, like, people that haven't spoken in a while or just haven't seen each other in a while. And I've been there and I've witnessed this. It's like a profoundly human moment, kind of awkward in the beginning, few glasses of wine. And, you know, people are trying to steer the ship into neutral waters. And then maybe you have a lot of fun before the end of the night. It's a deeply human ritual that has been done forever. And that now is interrupted. It's inevitably interrupted by people that cannot go more than a few minutes without staring at Donald Trump. It is the only thing our country does now. And there's good reason to do it. And he's off the wall. And some of the things he does are supremely crazy. And other things make sense. And then people treat those things like they're crazy.
So Tim Dillon's weird because back in the day, he was certainly more progressive. I think in his heart, he still is. He kind of grifted there for a little while. He was having conversations with J.D. Vance. And now he's kind of calling out Trump a little bit more. So he's trying to go backwards a little bit. So again, if you listen to his podcast from 4 or 5 years ago, certainly more progressive back then.
See, so it just doesn't, no one's got a new opinion on Trump, by the way. Nobody's trying to figure anything out anymore. It's the ultimate, it shuts down every attempt at human connection. This one guy who we paid very little attention to for his whole life. I mean, he was like a popular reality star and he was like a real estate developer. We know, like, I don't have to go back, but he is, since 2016, for the last decade, it has been impossible to think of the world without thinking of this man first. He comes before the world.
All right. So he's no longer talking about the no contact with family part. But that was really it, though, for you folks. I'm glad we could talk about Nick Reiner again. And tomorrow night, I'll be looking at a different topic to talk about. I don't know what it'll be. Or actually, Sunday nights, I haven't been going live. So I haven't made up my mind about that yet. I definitely won't be live the night of the Super Bowl. But that's not tomorrow. But everyone, thanks for joining me. So thank the mods here, Livin', Jimmy, and Songbits. You got a Corey and Real Sir and Ann and D. Sewell and Ellie and Heather and Danielle. Can't forget Danielle. And remember, for the record, Danielle does not have a woman crush on Maureen. Don't let her fool you. Sky, Eva, Risk. Bobby already said goodbye. Caroline, sweet Caroline. How could you ever forget sweet Caroline? Kenny, Sarah, and everyone else that was here. Your support is greatly appreciated. Cheryl, I didn't see Cheryl back here. She slipped in. Says family does not inherently signify anything beyond biological or legal relation. Those relationships should be approached the same way as any other relationship. It's a good point. It's a fancier way of saying blood is not thicker than water, and friends are the family we choose for ourselves. That's what I'd say to that. So thank you, Sarah. And everyone, Ellie, you have a good night. Make sure you like the video if you didn't, subscribe to the channel, and comment on the video once it's posted here too. That also helps. You got it, Diesel. That's what we're here for. We got a great flock of black sheep here. So with that, over and out, everybody. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. You can stay in the channel, but not in the chat. You have a good one, Rose and Eva. Everyone stay warm out there.